Hey everybody, MichaelBtheGameGenie here, and today I want to ask the question, why didn't these great NES games have Super Nintendo sequels?
Goodbye.
That is the question. Some of these games I'm going to be talking about today were absolute masterpieces on the NES. Not only were they standalone fantastic games, but in a lot of cases they had sequels or even launched series. But yet for some reason, they just never had a release on the Super Nintendo that continued the series. We were never gifted that. This is a very interesting topic. I've actually seen a couple other YouTubers do similar videos to it, which kind of inspired me, so I'm trying to pick games that you probably haven't seen in these lists before. And all these games have a very unique characteristic in the fact that they weren't standalone games. There was another release on the NES, so they were popular enough that they could have a sequel, just not popular enough for whatever reason to have a release on the Super Nintendo. Anyways, here's the first game. This one should be a no-brainer. We're going to start with easily the best game this time around, and also one some would consider to be a cheat. Ninja Gaiden, so we're all cool, it's Gaiden, right? Ninja Gaiden was one of the premier games for the NES growing up, and almost all the kids I knew either had it or we rented it. All the kids were amazed first off by the fact that you got to play as a ninja, because let's be honest, ninjas were cool in the 80s, and for a long time ruled the silver screen, and as the kids say, popular culture. But more so than that, the game was truly a treat, and right off the bat we were greeted with something we were not familiar with on the NES. Cutscenes. Even some with animation that added a storytelling element to the game that was unheard of back then for us kids, and made it feel like more than a game, like we were taking part in a movie. The presentation was also massively enhanced by the music, as Ninja Gaiden on the NES had some awesome music, and some I would love to hear more covers of today. On top of that, it played so goddamn well. The controls were just so tight, and it was a pleasure to lead Ryu Hayabusa on this side-scrolling action platformer. Well, outside of the difficulty, as there is no denying that this is a challenging game, and I still to this day cannot beat it. In fact, I will probably never beat it, due to a design choice on the final level / boss, but we will come back to that topic some other day. I do think the challenge was one of the selling points of the game, and why it was such a popular game to own or rent, as it was a badge of honor if you were good at the game, and you were a golden gaming god if you could beat it. The game was so popular that, like the other games in this video, it spawned sequels on the system. It was such a big deal to the history of Nintendo that when the NES Classic was set to release, it was one of the games to come packaged on the console. So with such a rich history and obvious importance to Nintendo's flagship console, why wasn't there a follow-up on the Super Nintendo? Here is the part where some of you will say the cheat comes in, because there actually was a Ninja Gaiden game released for the Super Nintendo, called Ninja Gaiden Trilogy, but let's be clear here that it was a massive disappointment. When I first heard of Ninja Gaiden Trilogy, I assumed it would be akin to Super Mario All-Stars, where they took the original NES trilogy and supercharged them with updated 16-bit graphics and music to create an enhanced experience on the new Super Nintendo. Ninja Gaiden Trilogy managed to somehow screw this up. Instead of an enhanced experience, they somehow managed to make it worse. The graphics weren't 16-bit, just weirdly changed versions of the original, and the music was god-awful. I mean god-awful compared to the original. I would always just prefer to play the original 8-bit versions on my NES, so I never really had any interest in picking it up, and as a collector the game was super expensive when I was older, and I already knew I wouldn't play it, so I just never bothered. Anyways, I went way off track there, but like I said, it's just a remastered version of the original trilogy that's actually maybe a little worse, and not a true sequel, so moving on. I'm sure that if there was an installment on the Super Nintendo that expanded upon the already widely loved formula that we knew and loved from the classic NES games, it would have been a raging success, like many of the other super sequels we all know and love. Unfortunately, Ninja Gaiden would disappear, and it wouldn't be until the 2000s before another game was released and tried to rebuild the brand. This is one that I personally think probably sucks the most we didn't get a super sequel. Unlike the last game I mentioned, this one sadly never saw another game after its run in the Nintendo Entertainment System. It may not be for everybody, but I know I'm disappointed because StarTropics is a heck of a little game, and it has a unique charm about it that those special games do. Those of you who have played it and know what I'm talking about will understand immediately, but how do I get it across to those who haven't? StarTropics is like a mix of The Legend of Zelda with Earthbound, if that makes any sense. The story starts with a child named Mike, great name by the way, arriving on an island to visit his uncle, who is an archaeologist. Upon your arrival to the first village, you meet with the chief, who explains that your uncle has gone missing, and you will have to traverse some dangers to go find him. Luckily, he knows you are a star baseball player, so he provides you with a yo-yo to defend yourself. You can't make this up, and trust me, it gets weirder from here. From there, you leave the village through a secret cavern, and the action starts. The game plays in that traditional top-down style that should be very familiar to fans of The Legend of Zelda. The combat is fine, as you can easily use your yo-yo to dispatch enemies, and the hit detection is pretty good, but I have to honestly comment on the controls because they can be a little frustrating at times. The crux of the problem is that your character can only attack in 4 directions, and sometimes the control to face your character one way or the other aren't super responsive, so you will have to adapt to this, but it is by no means game-breaking. The level's cavern should be a treat to those who enjoy puzzle-solving games, because there are some fun ones here to put together. At the end of each cavern is a boss, and these fights are pretty fun, featuring a large enemy you will have to dispatch upon learning its pattern and using the most effective weapon. This snake is easy, but I'll always freeze on him and get hit. From there you make your way to your uncle's lab and meet Dr. Jones' assistant, who lets Mike use his uncle's special submarine to go search for him. Then it's off to the open ocean, where you will discover a missing dolphin and eventually find out your uncle was kidnapped by aliens. Yeah, this game and story is out there, but in the best possible way. StarTropics had so much charm in both its presentation and gameplay, and for me it would have fit perfectly in with the Super Nintendo and all the great wacky top-down RPG and adventure games on the system. StarTropics did get a sequel during the first few years on the Super Nintendo, but on the NES, and I'm guessing it didn't sell well as people were more interested with the SNES at the time, and weren't buying a lot of games for the last generation. I guess this is what ultimately led to Nintendo not doing another game in this series on the Super Nintendo. I know personally, I would have loved to have seen this style at least expanded upon, and I think Nintendo truly missed a great opportunity to have another can't-miss wacky adventure game on the system. I honestly wasn't going to include Power Blade on this video when I originally came up with the concept. I didn't want to include it because I was going to focus on bigger games and from bigger gaming series, but the more I thought about how much I personally enjoyed the game and the history it had on the NES, including being the cover of a Nintendo Power back during my heyday with the system, I knew it had to be included. Power Blade was an excellent action platformer developed by Natsume, who did just some of the most spectacular work on the system, and released by Taito, who have a history of publishing some great NES games. I have previously myself said it was a hidden gem on the system, and it was to me at the time I first started playing it, but like I said, it was on the cover of Nintendo Power, so that is debatable. One thing that did surprise me is that most of the comments on my Hidden Gem video claimed that Power Blade was nothing more than a Mega Man clone, and honestly I failed to see the resemblance. Other than it being a side-scrolling action platformer with a projectile weapon that allows you to choose the stage you start on, I just don't see the comparison. That is like saying someone is ripping off the angry video game nerd by simply making a video on YouTube where he says a game is bad. Now, where have I heard that before? Before we go much further, we have to state the obvious here. You play as Arnold Schwarzenegger. Not officially, but I mean, come on, just look at this guy. Nova in the game, and on the box cover, is a complete ripoff of Arnold from the Terminator, and this was actually intentional. The game in Japan was much different, and when brought to the States, they changed the name, character design, in-game, and box art, and said, yeah, the Terminator. That's who Nova should be. The gameplay is really cool as you go around throwing a boomerang at everybody known as the Power Blade. It starts out relatively weak and with a short attack span, but as you progress, you can get power-ups that will increase the distance you can throw, size and shape of the blade, and even the number of blades you can throw at once. I really like the combat here as everything just feels right, if you know what I mean, and it's a treat to dispatch the enemies you will come across. In each stage, you have to find a hidden operative who will give you the code to access the area's boss, so that is the first objective to come across. The levels aren't straightforward and have branching paths, so it pays to explore each path. You can also increase your attack power and durability by getting a special suit in the level, but I always find this kind of frustrating because I spend so much of my health finding the suit, and once I have it, it only takes 3 hits and I lose it again, so I never get to the boss with it intact and my health has already decreased. The game never saw continuation on the SNES, and actually the whole series ended on the NES, which is really a travesty. Much like StarTropics, I blame the fact that there was a sequel on the NES released during the height of the Super Nintendo, and it was nowhere near the commercial success it needed to be to keep making games in the series. You know, NES games that failed due to the Super Nintendo isn't a bad idea for a video either. Maybe someday. Power Blade was an excellent game that I myself personally really enjoyed, and I would love to see what a Super Nintendo version would look like. Sadly, we will never see that, but there is still hope. With the recent rash of classic-inspired games on modern systems, maybe a modern 2D version of Power Blade or a continuation of the series could be a commercial success. Yeah, classic games that deserve new life in a modern 2D style. Damn it! Stop thinking about future videos, Mike. Well, those are just some great NES games that, for whatever reason, never had a continuation on the Super Nintendo or a sequel on the Super Nintendo. And I gotta say, in all three cases, I was really bummed out. Some of my favorite games on the Super Nintendo themselves were continuations of classic NES games and NES series that I was in love with, and I couldn't wait to see that iteration on the next system, and for some reason these games just didn't continue. And like I said on the end of the last video, there's still hope. I mean, there's that recent rash of modern 2D games that we're seeing now, and you know, you've got games like Sonic Mania, you've got games like Wonder Boy, and it'd be great to see some of these series reimagined and reignited on a modern system like the Switch, or you know, PS4 or Xbox One, with a game of that nature. Like, I would absolutely love to see that. So guys, what do you think? Are there other games on the NES that you think definitely deserve to have a Super Nintendo sequel, and you were really disappointed that that never happened? You know what? Let me know down in the comments below. And once again, thank you for sharing in my video game nostalgia. Hey there! Thank you for making it to the very end of the video. If you enjoyed the video, why don't you check out one of the other videos shown here? If you really enjoyed the video, you can even subscribe to my YouTube channel. And of course, if you really enjoyed the video, feel free to check out my Patreon. It would be appreciated.